Chris. What is your take on Florida State being left out, and what do you think is the prevailing thing that people should garner from this decision?
Sadness. I think when I saw Jordan Travis's tweet saying he apologizes for breaking his leg, not breaking his leg earlier in the season, that's just devastating, man. Like the image that ESPN had, the shot of Florida State learning that they weren't getting in. Jordan Travis is sitting right there, leg is up, towel
in
over
a wheelchair,
his face, just in a wheelchair, just brutal. Like I don't think you can say the committee got it right or wrong, because I don't think there was never an easy answer for this. I think this Alabama team is better than Florida State, but I don't think you can leave out an undefeated Power 5 team that went through everything, that played LSU in the non-conference and played Florida in the non-conference. They did everything they're supposed to do, and they got left out.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel really bad for them.
And you're number 4 in the rankings last week. You play in your conference championship on a neutral field. You play a top 15 team. You can say what you want about Louisville, but the committee are the only people whose opinions matter, and they said that Louisville is the 14th best team in the country. You beat them by double digits with your third string quarterback, and you are penalized for that.
Yeah,
that
games matter. The games mattered. The results didn't. And, I am always been the one pounding the table, the loudest, saying I know who would win this game, and we have to put in the better teams and all that stuff, but it's never gotten to the point where we actually had to leave out a team that did everything that they could. And, I think that the easy thing would have been to leave Alabama out, or the just thing would have been. I just don't know if the college football universe or the committee could live with the notion that the team that beat Georgia and won the SEC isn't worthy. But, to me, you look at Texas beating Alabama on the road and Florida State being undefeated. There was only one of those 3 teams that didn't do everything in their power to be put in this position. And sometimes you just lose the game you can't lose. That's the luck of the draw. It happened to Georgia. It happened to better teams in the past that have been left out that were probably better than this Alabama team. So, as we put the final chapter into the 4-team field, I think I could honestly say with a straight face right now that I am done with the 4-team. It was flawed. It was broken. I was wrong. And the reason why I say that is because my number one stance with the 4-team field has always been about the sanctity of the regular season and the playoff games that we get during that regular season that, lead to a just finish. And what we got here is a season that didn't matter. And that to me is heartbreaking for fans who hang on the edge of their seat every single day watching these games and, feeling that they do matter.
And I think, too, it's worth noting. Go ahead, Chris.
Does any team hate the college football playoff more than Florida State? Because we go back to 2014, the first year, Florida State is undefeated, the only undefeated team in the top 4. They're put at number 3 behind 2 one-loss teams. Then the last 14 playoff, they're undefeated and they're left out again. The AD Michael Alford released a absolutely scathing statement about this, saying this was unforgivable. It shows complete disregard and disrespect for their performance and accomplishments. It's a long statement worth finding online, but he says they have abandoned their responsibility by discarding their purpose to evaluate performance on the field. Tough for Florida State.
And this is what you've done. And I agree with you. I don't think you can say it's right or wrong necessarily, but you have to make a choice of what you're going to give up. And I really do think that what the playoff has given up here is having an undisputed national champion. I don't think that the voters are going to actually have a split national champion, but you're probably going to get an Orange Bowl where Florida State plays Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing that's probably going to happen. And you can say, oh, they can't do it. They can't do it. They can't do it. Well, the committee wants to entertain hypotheticals. Let's entertain a hypothetical. Let's say Florida State beats Georgia, maybe an unmotivated Georgia, maybe a Georgia that has some opt-outs because they're a 2-time national champion that's not going to be in the playoff. They win that game. They're undefeated. They beat the team that pretty much everybody probably agreed was the best team in the country for most of this season. We can call them with that, but whatever. They had a case for it, right? And they didn't get to compete for the championship. And the 4-team playoff was supposed to fix that. The 4-team playoff was supposed to make this impossible. You were always going to have G5s that got locked out for one reason or another. But a P5 was supposed to be impossible. This has not happened since 2004. Auburn went 13-0 and got locked out. in favor of an undefeated USC team that was in the middle of a dynasty and an undefeated Oklahoma team that obviously had won a ton of games as well. And so in the BCS era, it was always going to be possible. It was supposed to be impossible here. And the committee, by making this choice, has brought back into play the possibility of undermining its own champion in a scenario that shouldn't be possible. And now it is.
Well, the reason why that's so interesting is because in the past, there have been teams that have been left out in favor of other unbeaten teams. We're in a scenario right now where there are teams that have lost or didn't do their entire part in a subjective opinion trumped the results. And that, to me, is the most unfortunate thing because, listen, guys, hand to God here, I think Texas and Alabama would both beat the crap out of Florida State.
I do too.
I think that. I'm with you. I think the entire country thinks that. But I also thought Oregon was going to beat the crap out of Washington on Friday.
I did too.
I thought Ohio State was going to beat Michigan a few times in the last few years. It doesn't matter what we think. What matters is you earn it on the field. The regular season is important. And what happens in that regular season gives the teams that earned it a chance to be crowned the national champion. And I think that, without diminishing winning the SEC and beating Georgia and what kind of accomplishment that was for Nick Saban and the Alabama program, I don't think you can say with a straight face that Alabama earned it this year more than Florida State did. And that's that. So, and it's funny because, I think one of those two teams will probably end up winning the national championship now. And really, I'm not sure that Alabama should be the team in here. My perfect playoff would have been Michigan 1, Washington 2, Texas 3 or 4, and Florida State 3 or 4. And that's not what we got.
Yeah, and I think, too, it's worth noting that, like I said, I don't care what Alabama would have done in their bowl game. Nobody would I think the committee bought into the idea that you delegitimize the playoff by not having the SEC in there. And I think it's much more delegitimized by not having an undefeated Power 5 champion in there. Because it doesn't matter what Georgia or what Alabama do in their bowl games. They could beat, the Bears by 100. Nobody's going to be making a claim for them for a national title. Nobody's going to be making that case. They lost. Georgia lost with the stakes the highest. Alabama lost. And Alabama, it's also worth noting, has not just been dominant all season long. I don't know if you guys remember, it was like 8 days ago. They needed a 4th and 31 miracle to beat a very average Auburn team that lost to New Mexico State by 3 touchdowns a week earlier. So, it is what it is.
They did that. They beat Texas A&M by 6. They barely beat USF. That was a game into the fourth quarter. They lost to Texas by 10 at home. Like, there are not a slew. This was not a dominant Alabama team where it's like, man, how do you leave that Alabama team out?
Yeah.
We weren't saying that. We were saying, how do you leave the SEC champion out? And that is a flaw in the thought process because that's not how you're supposed to be.
They lost by double digits to a team that was also going to get in the playoff. And there's a 3 undefeated Power 5s. I think they overthought it a little bit, honestly. You have 3 undefeated Power 5 champions, and you have a team that has a head-to-head win on the SEC champions home field by double digits. It seemed pretty clean, relatively. There's going to be some hand-wringing and some complaining about the SEC being left out. But again, that's based on hypotheticals, which the committee has never used before, and now they have.
Never, yeah.
Thank you all for being here on the live reaction podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching us live, and if you're hearing this in podcast form, be sure to follow the YouTube channel. Leave us a voicemail moving forward for the Until Saturday tip line at 316-462-9852. That's 316-462-9852. We're going to play some voicemails later on in this game or in this episode, and we're going to react a little bit more to what we were just talking about. We're also going to get into the actual field and who's going to potentially win these games. But first, let me just go back a little bit to the Florida State scenario here. And I just wanted to, mention the statement from ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips after Florida State was left out. It's unfathomable that Florida State, an undefeated Power 5 champion, was left out. It's here on your screen. Their exclusion calls into question the selection process and whether the committee's own guidelines were followed. My heart breaks for the talented FSU student athletes and coaches and their passionate and loyal fans. Florida State deserve better, and college football deserve better. And I think that's true. I don't usually I'm not really moved by biased statements from teams that feel wronged, but when they're actually wronged, I think they're moving. So as we move forward into this podcast, I think it's pretty interesting that regardless of whether you're like, Chris and I don't view college football the same. Like we have debates all the time about things that pertain to the sport. I like the big dogs. I love watching Alabama. I was most entertained by watching the Alabama-Georgia game. Like I am a big recruiting lackey, but we all unanimously agree that this is bullshit. And like I'm not seeing a lot of people, fans might be like, yeah, well, they got it right in their hearts, but nobody can definitively say that. And I think that is the main issue with this.
Alabama versus Michigan is going to be a better game than Michigan Florida State would have been. But
presumably.
But this is the first time they say it's 4 best. I always say it's supposed to have been 4 best. They've never actually done that before.
They've never been put in a situation where they had to, right. Chris, because usually in the past, the 4 best and the 4 most deserving seamlessly ease into one group. Like this debate is always something that we talk about in November, but when it finally gets to the bottom line and we have to make a decision, it's usually the 4 best teams are also the 4 most deserving. I mean, in every other year, the SEC champion that beats Georgia and Atlanta is one of the most deserving teams. And every year, a 1-loss conference champion that beat Alabama on the road is one of the 4 most deserving teams.
Yeah.
It just worked out that there was an extra undefeated team there, and that took a back seat to the results. And it actually legitimately, I know there's people who, have these SEC bias conspiracy theories. I don't know that it was that, but it turned into a beauty contest. And I watched The Bachelor. That's enough for me. Like sports are supposed to be about winner and loser on the gridiron, 4 quarters, who wins, who loses, whoever won or lost, regardless of the circumstances. They're rewarded or penalized for that. And we watched Alabama not be penalized for a loss that they had.